Thanks for being with us today and enjoying the great content put together by Trio Maryland. Our last session of the day is Xenotransplantation, Past, Present, and Future. Please remember you can post your questions in the Q&A tab and we will share with the speaker after the presentation as time allows. We're excited to have Dr. Cameron, who is the director of the Johns Hopkins Department of Surgery and Surgeon-in-Chief of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Cameron was born at Hopkins and raised in Baltimore. His laboratory is currently studying stem cells and the liver to promote drug-free transplantation and pursuing the use of social media to increase organ donation. Please welcome Dr. Cameron.
Thanks very much, Hazel. And thanks all for having me today. Thanks to Trio for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for showing up this morning so that we can finish up what I bet has been an incredible day, an incredible morning for a journey that you're on. You talked about kidney, liver, thoracic transplant, made your way through COVID and nutrition all the way to medical cannabis. And what we could talk about now for the next stretch is maybe the future of organ transplantation. And that is the concept of xenotransplantation, or using animal organs as a donor for organ transplant. And what I'll do is take maybe the next half hour of your time and talk to you about this concept, which may seem far-fetched, where it's been, where it is now, and where it's going. And hopefully I can maybe even talk you into the fact that it's not the future anymore, it's the present. And it's really awfully exciting. So let's get started. And I think most importantly, I'll be really interested to hear what your thoughts, to hear your questions or your opinions on what is a very edgy, exciting, perhaps even controversial topic. All right, let's get started. So this part, you know well, the people in this room, in this virtual room, know this better than I do. We have a crisis, a public health crisis on our hands. So you've probably seen this slide a million times. You may have seen it earlier today. Look at the bottom lines. That's the number of transplants we do. And it's flat. And there's death on the wait list. And that's a terrible crisis. Look at the line that's going like this through the ceiling, and that's the number of folks on the wait list. And the difference between those two lines is the amount of time you wait for a kidney, for a heart, for a liver. And for a kidney, that wait can be 5 or 10 years. So this is a public health crisis. Many people die every day in the United States waiting for a transplant that doesn't come. Those are lives we could save if we have enough organs. That's what we're going to talk about today. Not enough organs. Where do we get more organs? Now, this is 2024. You know, that's a bad problem, but there should be solutions, right? There should be a solution to every problem we can think of in 2024 with modern technology. So let's, before we get to the far-fetched idea of using animal organs, what would be other possible solutions to the organ shortage crisis? Okay, well, what if we just do a better job with donation? So I and many, many others long before me have spent a lot of time trying to increase organ donation rates. And I'll put up this sort of silly picture. This is me at my college reunion with a college classmate of mine, Sheryl Sandberg, who was at the time chief operating officer of Facebook. And she actually came from a medical family. Her sister, her brother, and her dad were all Hopkins doctors, believe it or not. And she was out in Silicon Valley running a giant social media company. And she had studied at Harvard Business School the organ donation shortage. And she was convinced we could use social media to get the message out to improve organ donation rates. So we worked together and they changed the platform of Facebook so that in addition to describing, you know, what music you liked or where you went to school, you could declare that you were an organ donor. And that was a way to spread the message on organ donation. And it was successful, but it didn't cure the problem, as you can imagine. Living donation is another place where we could get organs to help with the organ shortage. Living donation is very safe in terms of, let's say, kidney donation. The kidney that results from a living donation is as good or better than one you would get from a deceased donor. It is safe to donate an organ as a living donor. Even so, living donation is going down in the United States. It's becoming less common, which is really hard to understand. So we went back to our friends in social media and they helped us develop an app for folks that are on the transplant wait list to tell their story in a social media post. Everybody's got a phone. Everybody knows how to use apps. Everybody knows how to post on Facebook. So this app would drag you through the creation of a post. This is who I am. I'm on the organ transplant wait list. This is how you learn more. This is how you contact my center if you want to learn more about possibly considering donation. And that worked too. The red line is the number of people at Johns Hopkins on the transplant wait list with no donor that used the app. They were 6 or 7 times more likely to have a donor come forward than the blue line, which is the same group of folks that didn't get to use the app. So maybe if we do a better job of encouraging donation, we could have a solution. What about other possible solutions? Machines, implantable hearts. Are we ever to get to the point where we don't need heart transplants because they're artificial hearts? What about implantable dialysis? What about using stem cells to rehabilitate damaged organs? What about printing new organs? These are all sort of exciting technologies. I'm here for it. If any of these come through, great. I'm still waiting. We're all still waiting. 20 people a day are dying, still waiting. So another idea that is one of the competitors to hopefully be a solution is using animal organs as a source of donors. And, hear me out, stick with me. That may seem far-fetched, but let's talk about it. So animals as a source of organs for transplant. It would have obvious advantages, right? So if it worked, we'd be done. There would be farms of pigs, for example, we could talk about that would essentially give us an unlimited supply of transplants. You wouldn't have to wait to get sick. If you needed a transplant, we could go to the farm tomorrow morning and come back with an organ, get you a transplant. Could be fantastic, could be the solution. The brain death donation process is very traumatic to organs in general. This wouldn't have that problem. These would be healthy animals that we could procure organs from. There are certain infections that we transmit when we use a human organ for transplant from a deceased donor. That donor may have Hep B, may have Hep C, may have HIV in some unusual circumstances. Pigs don't have those infections. Most importantly, pigs can be genetically modified these days, and we'll spend some time talking about that. But pigs are not perfect for transplant, but we could modify them in ways that are newly discovered and pretty incredible to make them potentially appropriate for transplant, maybe someday as good as human organs, maybe someday better than human organs. It might be preferable to get a pig transplant 5-10 years from now. It's pretty exciting. Obvious disadvantages associated with using animals as donors, and those would be immunology. So we reject human organs that get transplanted. Everybody in this room that's had an organ transplant takes immunosuppression and knows that if they don't, they'll reject their transplant. Well, you're going to reject an animal organ as well. In fact, you're going to reject it harder and quicker because obviously animals are immunologically more different, from a recipient than another human would be. So that's going to be a mountain we're going to have to climb. Physiologically, what do I mean? It's not immediately obvious that a pig heart or a pig kidney will work as well as a human heart or a human kidney. So we got to make sure that that's going to be okay. Now, I told you pigs don't have Hep B, Hep C, or HIV, and that's a good thing. Pigs might have other viruses that only pigs get that we have to worry about transmitting to humans. So we're going to have to, there's going to be some safety issues there. And then we should probably talk about the ethical issues. Are people going to be okay with this idea of using animals as donors? And that may be dependent on which animal we use as a donor. All right, let's talk about that for a second. So I could think of at least 2 possibilities of an animal donor. We could use what I'll call non-human primates, baboons or monkeys, as potential organ donor. Again, stick with me here. Or we could use pigs. Okay, so let's talk about which might be better, which might be worse. All right, so immunologically, we already touched on it. Baboons or non-human primates are very, very similar to humans. And those organs could be transplanted very easily. That would be very similar to doing a human organ transplant in terms of how much rejection there would be and how much immunosuppression you would have to take. Baboons, though, are not actually a good solution for this problem. And that's because there aren't enough baboons to go around. We need to transplant 100,000 people at least on the transplant wait list. That's the organ shortage. And their baboons are actually few and far between, and we would use all the baboons up pretty quickly. Baboons have, one baby at a time like humans, and they take years to grow up to a size and age at which they would be appropriate for donation. So, there just would be a numbers problem with trying to use baboons as a source of organs. Baboons might actually be too small. Most baboons that we're talking about might be smaller than you would think, and their organs might be too small to be effective. They are, again, very similar to humans. That's a plus. Their kidneys would work, their hearts would work the same way ours do. You can't genetically engineer baboons. That would be a disadvantage. Baboons get some infections that we would have to worry about. And again, I don't think the public would go for it. The ethics of public opinion would probably be against using baboons as a donor source for organs. Contrast that to pigs. Pigs, as I'm saying, are immunologically more challenging. They are evolutionarily much different than people and non-human primates. They have, we'll get into it, but the immunologic challenges would be greater. Pigs, on the other hand, there's a plenty of pigs. And pigs are born in litters of 6 to 8 at a time. And they become mature adult-sized pigs in 6 months. So pigs' numbers would be adequate as a solution to the many organs we're going to need. So pigs breed well, their organs would be the appropriate size. They probably be similar enough. A pig heart is going to pump blood probably the same way a human heart pumps blood. Hopefully a pig kidney is going to clear your blood the same way a human kidney does. They can be genetically engineered, and I'm going to talk about that. And that's what is really the game changer that makes this topic exciting. We have a lot of experience with pigs via farms and for food production. The infectious risk of transmitting a pig virus to a human is probably actually very low. And probably this is ethically acceptable to the vast majority of the population. So that's something we could think about and talk about. But start the discussion by saying we currently slaughter 100 million pigs every year in the United States for food. And there are alternative food sources, obviously. So that's something that our society has decided it's okay with. And if we used 100,000,001 pigs to save somebody's life who needed a transplant, I think that would probably be okay. But I'm here for all the discussion you guys want to have. All right. If this seems like science fiction that I'm talking about, it's been done. It's actually been done. This is Leonard Bailey, an absolutely wonderful pediatric heart surgeon who I had the honor to meet. He works in Southern California. I met him one night doing an organ procurement. And he's a brilliant pediatric heart surgeon. Here's a wonderful picture of all the little kids whose lives he'd saved with heart operations. And shown up here in the right upper corner is baby Faye, which some of you may be old enough to remember. Baby Faye was a little girl in California that needed a heart transplant in 1984, couldn't get her a heart. Leonard Bailey put a baboon heart into baby Faye, and it worked. She lived for a couple weeks, and it was a bit of, as you might imagine, an international sensation. So this may seem like science fiction, but it's been done, actually. Here's another example. Keith Reemsma, shown here, was a surgeon in the 1960s who in New Orleans sewed in a bunch of chimpanzee kidneys. And again, remember I mentioned those non-human primate organs are immunologically and physiologically very similar to humans. And those recipients in the 60s lived 9 months with a kidney that worked from a chimpanzee. So xenotransplantation may seem far-fetched, but it's been done. This is, I don't know if anybody remembers this guy. This is Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye Pierce on the TV show MASH. That character, Hawkeye, was based on Keith Reemsma. Here's our friend Leonard Bailey in 84, who in Southern California transplanted a baboon heart, lasted 2 weeks. And our friend Tom Starzl, shown here, transplanted a baboon liver in the 90s, and that lasted over a couple months. So it has been done, and it kind of worked, but not really. This isn't good enough. Nobody wants a transplant that lasts a couple weeks or a couple months. That's not good enough. And so Xeno was an interesting idea with some promise that was ultimately abandoned. And people figured, well, it's not ready for prime time. It doesn't really work. So it was dropped, and it was dropped for 30 years. People lost interest and lost hope in xenotransplantation. Sort of a running joke in transplant is, what is the future of organ transplant? It's xenotransplantation, and it always will be. It's like this great idea that people talk about, but it's never actually really going to happen. It's always going to be this holy grail off in the distance. All right, and the reason it doesn't work is as follows. Here's a little bit of science. So, this isn't going to be on the test, but this is Big John Najarian. I think he played football. He's football at Berkeley. There he is. But he was a famous organ transplanter and a researcher at Minnesota. And he figured out that the reason animal organs don't work is because we all have antibodies that we're born with against animal organs, right? So pigs have an antigen or something on their blood cells and organs that we reject. We have antibodies against them. So here's a picture and pig sugar chain. So pigs have something on their cells that we don't like. We all have antibodies very soon after we're born against pig organs that make us hyper acutely reject them. We reject pig organs on the order of minutes. Baboons, maybe months, but pigs we reject in minutes. So no good. Pigs at least for sure aren't going to work. And it was dropped. People lost hope until there was a bit of a breakthrough. And that breakthrough was from my friend David Ayers in the early 2000s. There's David visiting Hopkins recently. We had him as a guest speaker. David did something very hard and very clever. He genetically engineered a pig to knock out a gene. And the gene he knocked out was the gene that puts that disruptive antigen in place. So we still have these antibodies. You could get rid of the human antibodies, or you could get rid of the thing they bind to on the pig. David Ayers adopted this strategy. It took him 10 years, but he knocked out the gene that puts that sugar in place. And now he had pigs that didn't have the sugar, so the antibodies we have didn't matter. And it was hoped that these pigs would be the answer to the organ shortage crisis. And so this is early 2000s. And so whereas before we would reject a pig organ in minutes, with these new version of super genetically engineered pigs, they lasted weeks to months. So better, but not good enough. And we despaired again, and the field dropped Xeno again. It's closer, but it looks like it's still off in the future, and it's never really going to happen, and people abandon Xeno again. Then the real game changer happened. All right, here's a little more science for you. It's called CRISPR-Cas. Maybe you've heard of that. Most likely you have. CRISPR-Cas is a scientific concept and a discovery I'm going to explain to you in 3 easy bullet points here. That's what CRISPR stands for. Let me just suffice it to say, it is a defense mechanism that bacteria have that they use to chop up invading viral DNA. Okay. And researchers discovered that and quickly realized that they could use this system of CRISPR DNA cleavage to very efficiently modify genes. It was very, very hard for David Ayers. It took 10 years to knock out one pig gene. The discovery of CRISPR-Cas allowed for the very easy manipulation of genes, insertion and removal of genes very, very easily. That's all you need to know. If you want more, it's described in a great book This Walter Isaacson's wrote a bunch of great biographies. Here's one about Jennifer Doudna, who is the scientist at Berkeley who figured out CRISPR-Cas, one of the people who helped figure out the CRISPR-Cas story. It's a really neat story, and it's a really important scientific breakthrough. And it was interesting and it was controversial. Here's a picture of Dr. Doudna receiving her Nobel Prize for CRISPR-Cas. That's how important it was, but it was controversial. Like, what should we do with this new technology? Should we modify human genomes? Should we create humans that are resistant to HIV, or humans that are taller or smarter? Very, very, very controversial. And people in general don't think we should do any of those things. But people were okay with modifying pig genomes. So whereas poor David Ayers had to work 10 years to knock out one gene, now he had a tool that would allow him to knock out genes very quickly. And that is super exciting. So CRISPR, you're now an expert in CRISPR, will enable genetic manipulation, for example, of pigs to make them better for transplant. And here's an article from our friends at Harvard, George Church, and the eGenesis scientific team. That's a biotech team up in Cambridge, Mass, that is working on pigs. And here in Nature, I think, they published a paper in 2015 in which they knocked out 62 pig genes. And that was just showing how easy it was these days to knock out pig genes with CRISPR. Very, very, very exciting. So here you go. There are new pig options. So forget that pig with one knockout. Now we have pigs with 10 genetic edits. That's what GE stands for. 10 GE pig, 10 genetic edits. This is from our friends at Revivicor. Revivicor is the biotech company that we work with at Hopkins. It's just down the road in Blacksburg, Virginia. And here's the new pig. It's got 10 knockouts. It's got 10 genetic edits. So let me tell you briefly. It's got 3 knockouts. So genes removed to make the pigs less pig-like. And the first one they knocked out is this 1,3 alpha gal gene. And that's the one that David Ayers took him 10 years to knock out. So they knocked out that for starters. And they knocked out 2 more genes that also contribute antigens against we also have antibodies. So I told you when David Ayers made his pig, it only worked, for weeks to months. And that's because there were other antigens that were now revealed to be problems after the main one was out of the way. You got to get rid of these other ones too. In addition to knocking out several genes, they knocked in or added human genes. So here are 6 human genes that were added in to make these pigs more human-like. They were genes that were immunosuppressive to make them good for transplant, or anti-clotting, or anti-inflammatory. So you get the idea, right? We can make pigs now that are not only okay for transplant, they might be good for transplant. In fact, they might be better for transplant. There was one more gene they knocked out, and this is kind of a funny one. They knocked out the growth hormone receptor in pigs because it was, I don't know if you guys have ever seen real live pigs, but they get big. And it was worried that if you transplanted a pig heart, it would get too big for the human recipient. So they knocked out the growth hormone receptor so that the pig organs wouldn't grow too big in their human recipients. All right, so now we have 10 GE pigs with 10 genetic edits, thanks to CRISPR-Cas, and maybe Xeno has new life. Here's the different companies that are working on it. I mentioned Revivicor, which is the company we partner with. There's eGenesis, our friends up at Harvard, who have a very similar pig with a bunch of genetic edits, very similar edits to the ones I just showed. And then there are a host of other companies also working on, these exciting new pigs that could be the source of organs that would eliminate the donor shortage crisis. Does this all seem impossible to believe? I mean, does it seem like science fiction? It couldn't possibly be true. It doesn't sound real. It is real. I can tell you, that's the pig that's going to change the world. I have met that pig, and it's pretty exciting. Where do we go from here? Well, there's been trials with these exciting pigs. Maybe you've heard of one that happened here in town at the University of Maryland. It's published in the New England Journal. There was a patient, Mr. Bennett, shown here. Mr. Bennett was deathly ill. over at University of Maryland, needed a heart transplant, couldn't get one. Mr. Bennett was on ECMO. He was on 3 different medications just to support his blood pressure. He was going to die. The doctors at University of Maryland, that's Bart Griffith there, his heart surgeon, asked the FDA for special permission to try a Hail Mary by giving Mr. Bennett a pig heart transplant with a 10 GE modified pig. And Mr. Bennett and his family wanted to go for it, and he got a heart transplant from a pig, and it worked. And he came off ECMO, and he came off all his blood pressure medicines. In fact, Mr. Bennett's pig heart worked so well that Mr. Bennett had hypertension, and he had to go on medicines to reduce his blood pressure. And I thought Mr. Bennett was going to leave the hospital and throw out the first pitch at Camden Yards. And I thought the game was over, and we were going to have an endless supply of organs, and there was going to be no more problem, with folks dying on the list. And Mr. Bennett did great for a month. And then his pig heart stopped working as well. And then it stopped working at all. And Mr. Bennett died after 2 months. And it turned out that it wasn't rejection, which was, first of all, it was a tragedy, right? I mean, Mr. Bennett and his family, it was terrible. And it was difficult, for the doctors and the field and all that. But, we got to push forward. And there were some things learned from Mr. Bennett's 2-month heroic journey. Number one, he did not die of rejection, which is some proof that we're making progress against rejection of animal organs. Interestingly, unfortunately, tragically, he died of a virus, not a human virus. He died of porcine CMV. So again, if you've had a transplant, you probably have heard about CMV before, and you probably took ganciclovir so that you didn't get in trouble with CMV, and that's human CMV, human cytomegalovirus. There is porcine cytomegalovirus that his pig donor had that reactivated and stopped his heart from working well. Now, we are able to detect porcine CMV in pigs and should be able to use donor pigs that do not have CMV. Of course, his doctors and the company that supplied the pig thought that pig was CMV free, but it had latent CMV that was very hard to detect. We now have better tests available to more sensitively detect CMV, and we know that his donor pig did have CMV. A couple more things to tell you about the group at UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham, and the group at NYU, our old friend Bob Montgomery, have gone further with xenotransplantation. They took pig kidneys and transplanted them into what we call decedents. So if you die and you want to donate your organs, we all know that's a wonderful thing. That's a life-saving thing to do. There are people who are medically inappropriate, unable to donate their organs. Maybe they died of a metastatic cancer. They still may want to donate their body to science, and their body can be used, in this case, not as a donor, but as a recipient. So they were brain dead, but they were kept going in an ICU, and the pig kidney was transplanted into them to see how it would do. And Jamie Locke at UAB and Bob Montgomery in NYU transplanted pig kidneys into human decedents. And they lasted, in Jamie's case, they watched it for a week, and in Bob Montgomery's case, they watched it for 2 months, and the kidney functioned. Bob transplanted what's called a thymo kidney. So Jamie Locke transplanted one of these 10 GE kidneys we've been talking about. Bob Montgomery transplanted a single gene knockout kidney, the one from 20 years ago with David Ayers. And but the trick there was they transplanted the thymus, which is an immune organ which helps prevent rejection. More to come on that. Maybe you've heard in the news very, very recently, doctors at Mass General transplanted a pig kidney from eGenesis, that other biotech company, into a living person. It was a middle-aged guy that had had a kidney transplant that had worked, lost the kidney, and then he'd gone back on dialysis. He was back on the kidney transplant wait list for a retransplant. He was having trouble with his dialysis access and was in urgent need of a transplant. He was unlikely to get one for many years. he had a pig kidney transplant. That was just a couple months ago. Again, Bob Montgomery, I mentioned, had done that decedent work. He also transplanted a pig kidney, again, a single gene knockout pig, into a needy recipient up at NYU. So over the last couple years and over the last couple months, there have been a handful, maybe 4 xenotransplants already, in real life. And it's incredibly exciting times. And we're just figuring out, we're at the start of our journey of whether this is going to be the solution to this terrible problem we've been talking about this morning. All right, so let's talk about, we're very, very interested in xenotransplant at Hopkins as well. And we recruited one of the world leaders in xenotransplantation from Columbia and Harvard. Kaz Yamada is the gentleman shown in the front here with a white jacket on. And Kaz has been working on xenotransplantation for 30 years. And he has done the experiments to see if these pig kidneys are going to work. How do you test whether one of these new pig kidneys is going to work? Well, you don't just put it into a human necessarily. You put it into the closest thing we have to a human, which I've been mentioning, is a baboon. Baboons are so similar to us, you could transplant their organs as a donor. They are so similar to us that you could transplant a pig kidney into them as a test recipient. And Kaz has been able to transplant single gene knockout kidneys and 10 GE kidneys into baboons with or without the thymus, which was something he discovered, and get them to have a normal creatinine, normal kidney function for a year. It's pretty exciting. And Kaz published that in Nature, and it's a big splash. And, it's pretty exciting science because it's going to have a real life impact, for our patients. And all this is now going on at Hopkins. So where is this going to go? And when's it really going to happen? Or is it just another false start? Well, the government decides whether we can do xenotransplant or not. And the arm of the government that's responsible for giving permission for xenotransplant is the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. It is the FDA that will give us permission to do a human clinical trial. So that's what we really want to do. We want to do a proper clinical trial in which we carefully study, whether xenotransplantation is safe and effective. The 4 xenotransplants I've described to you that the FDA approved were not part of a clinical trial. They were part of what I called a Hail Mary. They were compassionate use permission. So those doctors appeal to the FDA, not for a trial, but for one-time permission. If those operations, those xenotransplants are a success, it doesn't lead to FDA approval of pig kidneys for the list, which is what we really want. I mean, we don't want to do this just once. We want to do this 1,000 times. We want to do this 100,000 times. If this is going to be worth it, it's not just going to be scientifically showing off. It's going to be something we can do 100,000 times to end the organ donor shortage. And that is only going to be when the FDA approves for clinical usage, like they have to approve any drug. So the FDA is going to allow us to do a clinical trial in people if we can show them success in what they call critical animal experiments. And that's similar to what I just described with Kaz Yamada testing these pig baboons. And that will hopefully, if we have good results in those animals, allow us to get FDA permission to run a multi-center clinical trial, which will result in FDA approval of xenografts, which will result maybe in a solution to the organ shortage crisis. We are hopeful to start that human trial in less than a year. So I don't know if that's the future, but that's the near present. That's coming up. This is an example of those critical animal experiments. So there we are up in Baltimore. We fly down to Blacksburg, Virginia, just like we're doing a human organ procurement, procure kidneys from 10 GE pigs. Here's a picture of me and Bart Griffith, that heart surgeon from Maryland I mentioned. Here we are flying down to Blacksburg. He's going to take the heart from the 10 GE pig. I'm going to take the kidney. I'm going to fly back to Baltimore. He's going to put it into a baboon. I'm going to put it into a baboon, and we're going to make sure these things work before we do them in people. It works. This is a paper that Kaj Yamada and our group at Hopkins published a month ago, describing the success we're having with these 10 GE pig kidneys into baboons. And, I'm very proud of Kaz and the team that this is the best results ever reported in animal xenotransplantation. And we're hopeful this is going to be good enough for the FDA to give us that permission to do this clinical trial in humans at Hopkins on the wait list that have very little hope of getting a kidney transplant in the near future. All right. It's pretty exciting, but there's a real need for caution and care here. Some important issues. So there are risks, right? The risks are obvious. The risks are obvious that it might not work. We might do a transplant for somebody that doesn't work. If it's a kidney transplant and the graft stops working, we could put you back on dialysis, and you wouldn't lose your space, your position for a human kidney transplant. You wouldn't lose your time. You wouldn't lose your position on the list. But there'd be other risks, right? Besides just the transplant not working, there would be infectious risks that we've talked about, not only to the donor, to the recipient, like Mr. Bennett, but to other people, right? Like we wouldn't want to unleash a pig virus on the general population. We have just gotten over COVID, which was a once in 100-year terrible pandemic, which happened when a virus jumped from an animal to humans. We do not want to have that happen in the context of xenotransplantation. And of course, the government, whose job it is to protect us, doesn't want to have that happen either. So there's a lot of regulatory oversight, and that's via the FDA, as I described. I'll call that external oversight, getting permission to do this work. And then there's what I'll sort of think of the important issue of ethics, and that's maybe where I think we should launch this discussion. Just because we can do something, and I hope I have convinced you that we probably can do a pig kidney transplant, and it's probably going to work. If you put a kidney into a baboon and it works for a year, it's going to work in a person. It's the same thing. Just because we can do it, should we do it? Now, there are 20 people that die every day that don't get a transplant that probably think we should do it. But we got to be careful. Who goes first? I am convinced in 5 or 10 years, these kidneys are going to be better than human kidneys, right? Like this 10G version we're using now, that's like 1.0 or 2.0. There's going to be a version 7.5, in 10 years, that's going to be really good. But here we are, we got to push ahead. Who goes first? And maybe I'll leave you with that. They're a beautiful city. I'm very proud that a lot of this xenotransplant work is taking place and is going to take place in Baltimore at the great hospitals we have here. And, we need to figure out who is the right person to go next. And we want to have a good result. We want to help people. We want to get people off dialysis. And, how we're going to do that. We got to do it safely. We got to do it carefully. We got to do it ethically. We got to do it with patient participation. So that's maybe I'll stop there, and maybe I'll open it up for questions, and I'll ask the group to give me their thoughts on xenotransplantation.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. We do have one question from the audience, so let's start with that. This question comes from Kelly. She says, pigs as a source of xenotransplantation ethically, what about Jews and Muslims, vegetarians and vegans who object to using pigs for anything?
Great question. Great question. I am not a world religion expert, but the leaders of all those major religions that you just referenced do support organ donation, and specifically in this case, pork products would be allowable. And again, there are cases in which we already do that, right? So if you need a heart operation, God forbid, for a new valve, sometimes that valve is a prosthetic. Sometimes we use a pig valve. And nobody thinks twice about that because you don't need immunosuppression. You don't reject that pig valve. But it would have to be cleared by religious authorities, but I don't think it would be a problem. I think there would be, consideration and then exception given in the way that cardiac pig valves are utilized by folks of all religions. I think that that's helpful though. This is the type of discussion we have to have. Who goes first, who has issues with this, who doesn't have issues. And that's part of the discussion. We need to be very sensitive. There might be some patients that just don't want to do this. They maybe even independent of religion, they just don't want to have a pig organ. And there might be others that say, if I'm going to die on dialysis, I will take whatever you have, including a pig organ. So I have patients that tell me they don't want an organ from a human with hepatitis C, or they don't want one from an older person, or they don't want one from somebody who's been in jail. And I work around that. Of course, honoring their preferences and also via education. It sounds bad, but it's okay to take an organ from somebody in jail. It sounds bad, but we have medicines for hepatitis C. You could take an organ from somebody with hepatitis C and we could treat you. So it's fast moving. But your point's well taken. It's all got to be done with patient participation and approval.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. We have a second question
Sure.
from Bill, and his question is, will this also apply to other organs such as lungs?
Sure hope so. It's a great question. And the short answer is yep, it will. So researchers at Johns Hopkins are studying lung xenotransplantation. The reason I mentioned kidney and heart is because those are the ones that are the furthest along in terms of readiness for prime time. I'm a liver transplant surgeon, and I would love to have pig livers work like Tom Starzl was working on. But the answer is yes. So, maybe the first ones that'll work are heart and kidney is my bet. And then after that, it's going to be lung and liver. Islets for diabetes might come from pigs. That could be exciting. We don't know, but rest assured, people are working on it very actively, especially lungs.
All right, our third question is from Karen. What medication would you need post xenotransplant?
Okay, great question. So one that's been studied for like 30 years. So initially, when we were using sort of unmodified regular animals, the amount of immunosuppression you needed was humongous because it was a very foreign organ you were getting. Now, with the genetic manipulations that I described, they are getting so human appearing that the amount of immunosuppression you need is regular. So in these baboon experiments that I've been describing that Dr. Yamada does, we do them with the baboon recipients get the same immunosuppression that you would get after a human transplant. So, steroids, Prograf, MMF, regular immunosuppression. And that's exciting. So it wouldn't be extra. It would just be normal. Now we don't know. We gotta figure all this out together. And it may be that the first recipients of a xenograft do get extra immunosuppression, and we figure out how much they do or don't need. We have a ton of experience at Hopkins with antibody-mediated rejection, ABO incompatible transplants, cross-match positive transplants. And those, we have techniques for getting rid of antibodies that are bad for human transplants. Those techniques are probably going to be very relevant for xenotransplants. We've knocked out like 95% of the antibodies, but there might still be some. So we're going to have to figure this out together. But the short answer to your question is the immunosuppression for a xenotransplant should be the same as for a human transplant. We could even imagine a future in which we're able to engineer these grafts so that you don't need immunosuppression, right? So we can tailor these pigs. And what if we not only knocked out the pig genes and knocked in the human genes, but we knocked in your genes? And we created a pig that was specifically designed with your genes so that when you got that animal's organ, it was you. You theoretically wouldn't need any immunosuppression at all. So that's really sort of personalized medicine, as they call it. And that might be 20 years down the road.
Thank you. And our next question is from Tina. Are pig or other animal livers being researched for transplantation?
They are. And so it's kind of technical, but livers are hard. And I'm really interested in liver transplantation. And we need livers badly. In some ways, I don't know, we need livers as bad or worse than kidneys, right? Because there's no liver dialysis. So we mostly talked about rejection, like how can we alter these organs so that you don't reject them? That's half the battle. The other half of the battle was they have to work, and a pig heart pump heart will probably work. Kidney has to filter your blood, probably that'll work. A liver is very complicated and has to make a million proteins that your body needs, and it's not clear if the proteins that the pig liver makes will be good enough to work for a human. So, stay tuned. 5 years from now, let's get hearts working, let's get kidneys working, and let's keep working in the lab on livers. And then maybe they'll be ready for human transplant in 5 years.
Our next question is, would the 65% more likely to develop any type of cancer for transplant patients increase, decrease, or stay the same with the xenotransplant?
Excellent question. And my short answer is my guess is it would stay the same because the cancer risks that you have after transplant are a function of the immunosuppression you take. And the immunosuppression would be the same for a xenotransplant. So I think the cancer risk would be the same. And again, it would be really exciting if you could get an animal organ and take less immunosuppression. Right now, we think you're probably going to have to take the same or more. But what if we could keep working on these donors and get them so perfect that you would have to take less immunosuppression? Then there might be less of a cancer risk. And that would be exciting too.
Our next question from Karen is, I think this is a huge step forward. As a recipient of a liver transplant back in 2010, I was running out of time, but was lucky. If I was in the same situation in the future and I was offered Xeno, I would take it rather than die.
I mean, this is serious. This is real life, right? You guys know better than me. I mean, I want to get you the best organ I possibly can. And right now, that's probably, if I can get you a human organ, obviously that's a human organ. If I have a living donor, let's do that. I am worried 20 people a day die because there's none of those options. And then to your point, those people may say, I'll go for it. And I can't wait until it's good enough that you go for it even when you do have another option. Because these animal organs have gotten so good that it's first line. So, it'll take a while, but we're getting there. And you're right, it's life and death. I mean, we're only doing this because people die waiting because there aren't enough to go around. And so this is a potential game-changing solution. We still got to have donation, deceased donation, living donation for now and for the foreseeable future. But this would add to it for the people that can't get either one of those. And then they're, in the future, they might get so good that this is the go-to.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. And our last question is from Bill. Is this research funded by the government?
So the NIH wants progress, wants medical progress, and they heavily fund this research. The NIH, like I was saying, was into it and then they cooled off. And then they were into it and they cooled off because Xeno was going to work and then it wasn't going to work. It's also heavily funded by industry, right? So this is like drug development. These are for-profit companies. And Pfizer makes a vaccine and sells it. Bayer makes a drug, a heart drug, and they sell it. These are biotech companies that are making these pigs in the hope of saving lives and also to sell them as medical products. So the funding for the research comes from both sources. The government, which is sort of like neutral, right? Like the NIH just wants good science and good medical progress. And then it also comes from industry who very much want to see these products succeed, because they've invested a ton as a company and they want to be able to sell them. And we got to watch that too. Companies are for profit. I'm not for profit. I'm for the patient. But it may be that for-profit companies have developed an incredible medical tool which will help us for our patients. I'm not making a penny on this any which way forever, but I am here for it if it's going to save patient lives.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. That was our last question. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I really appreciate your time. This is going to need to be collaborative, with our patients as we move forward. We're going to need your thoughts and your participation in xenotransplant as we consider changing the future. We're excited about it, but we're excited about it because it's hopefully going to save the lives of people on this call and then people for 10s, 20s, 100 years down the road. I also want to thank Marty and Michelle and all the organizers at TRIO for inviting me to participate this morning. This is a group that I really believe in. And, it's our patients that we love, and that's the most important thing. So thanks for having me. Everybody have a great day. Go O's.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. I'm looking at the time and we actually got one last question while you were making your closing remarks. Do we have time to take that, or would you like to answer that later?
Sure,
Okay.
go for it.
Okay, and I will make this the last question for the session. This is for Mary. What would stop an individual from receiving a pig liver?
We have to test everybody to see if they have any of these extra antibodies that we haven't knocked out. We have to make sure that the pig liver is going to work in people. It's not there yet. What's stopping it right now is the science isn't there yet. The kidneys are there. I think the FDA is going to support a clinical trial within a year. The livers are not ready for prime time. That's 5 years away. We're going to have to make do, with deceased donation and living donation and everything else for the next 5 years. I'm hopeful the scientific progress has to get there. But, right now, the livers aren't there, but it's the hearts and the kidneys. And I look forward to a future when all these organs are available for all people and we can transplant the wait list and we don't have to wait till you get terribly sick. We can do them during the daytime. No more all-night transplants. That's going to be nice too.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron, again for sharing your thoughts with us.
My
And
pleasure.
to close out this year's conference, we're going to welcome back Marty Marin.
Thank you for joining us today for TRIO Maryland's third virtual transplant conference. We hope it provided the information you need to make informed decisions and to lead a healthy transplant life. I'd like to express our gratitude to the TRIO Maryland Board of Directors, Ashton Conference Planning Professionals, and DRIO. Also, I would like to thank our partners, Infinite Legacy, Johns Hopkins Hospital, and the University of Maryland Medical Center. Thanks to our speakers for sharing their expertise with us. Thank you to the sponsors that continue to support TRIO Maryland and all our educational efforts. TRIO National, the National Kidney Foundation of Maryland and Delaware, CareDx, Anatomy Gifts Registry, Peak Relief, and the Infinite Legacy. Don't forget to check out our sponsors' website for more details and information. All sessions have been recorded and will be available to view on the TRIO Maryland YouTube channel. An email notice will be sent out to you when it is available. Check out our website at www.triomaryland.org to review our calendar for upcoming speakers. Follow us and like us on Facebook and Twitter. I post current transplant information daily, so don't miss out. Check out our YouTube channel for our past presentations. And once again, thank you all again, and thanks for starting your day with us. Have a great weekend.